In the distant epochs of human history, there was a time remembered not for ruin or desperation, but for certainty. It was an age when humanity looked outward into the void with confidence rather than fear, and when the stars were not yet symbols of loss, but destinations waiting to be reclaimed. Long before betrayal fractured the dream of unity, before brother turned against brother, there existed a singular purpose that bound countless worlds together under one vision. This was the era that would later be named the Great Crusade. The galaxy into which humanity emerged was vast beyond comprehension. Civilizations had risen and fallen in cycles so long that even their ruins had turned to dust. Warp storms isolated entire regions of space, cutting human worlds off from one another for millennia. On countless planets, fragments of ancient technology survived like half-remembered myths, while cultures diverged, adapted, and forgot their shared origin. Yet humanity endured. On Terra, the cradle of mankind, a figure of unmatched presence had waited through the long night of isolation and collapse. Known only as the Emperor, he did not rule through spectacle or sentiment. His authority was distant, absolute, and grounded in a vision that stretched far beyond the limits of a single lifetime. He had watched humanity fracture, and he had resolved that it would never be allowed to happen again. The unification of Terra was only the beginning. When the Emperor finally revealed his hand to the wider galaxy, it was not through diplomacy alone, nor through conquest alone, but through inevitability. He brought with him armies shaped by science and purpose, warriors engineered to embody the unity he demanded of the species. They were not merely soldiers, but symbols, living proof that humanity could surpass its former limitations. These warriors were the legions Astartes, forged from human stock yet elevated beyond it. The Space Marines were organized into vast brotherhoods known as legions. Each legion bore the genetic imprint of a Primouch, beings crafted to lead, to inspire, and to conquer in the Emperor's name. The Primarchs were not merely commanders. They were living ideals, reflections of the Emperor's grand design expressed through different strengths and temperaments. At their head stood Horus, first found among his lost brothers, and elevated above all others as War Master. In this age, his name carried no shadow. He was admired not only for martial brilliance, but for his ability to unify disparate forces beneath a common cause. Where others inspired awe or fear, Horus inspired loyalty. Together, the Emperor and his son set humanity in motion once more. The Great Crusade was not a sudden blaze of conquest, but a steady, relentless advance. Fleet by fleet, system by system, the Imperium expanded outward from Terra like a tide that could not be turned. Human worlds long isolated were rediscovered, evaluated, and brought back into the fold. Some welcomed reunion with open arms, grateful to learn that they had never truly been alone. Others resisted, clinging to independence or warped interpretations of human destiny. Resistance, however, was never allowed to linger. Compliance was a word used by imperial chroniclers, and it carried a precise meaning. A world would be assessed for its adherence to the Emperor's vision of a rational, unified humanity. Those that aligned were integrated peacefully, their cultures preserved where possible, their technologies catalogued and improved. Those that refused were subdued with measured force, their defiance erased not out of cruelty, but necessity. In this era, such actions were not questioned. The Imperium of the Great Crusade was confident in its moral certainty. It believed, utterly, that unity was survival, and that fragmentation would lead only to extinction. Alien civilizations, no matter how ancient or advanced, were viewed as obstacles to humanity's manifest destiny among the stars. The galaxy was dangerous, indifferent, and vast, and only through singular purpose could mankind hope to endure. The Emperor rarely led from the front. Though capable of unimaginable power, he chose instead to remain distant, allowing his sons to carry his authority across the stars. This absence was not neglect, but design. The Imperium was meant to function without constant intervention, guided by structure, law, and the shared belief in a future shaped by human reason rather than superstition. Religion was discouraged. Faith, the Emperor believed, divided where knowledge united. In its place, he offered the imperial truth, a secular doctrine that promised enlightenment through science, progress through unity, and peace through strength. It was a promise that resonated deeply with worlds weary of myth and fae. For a time, it worked. The Imperium grew at a pace unmatched by any civilization before it. Supply lines stretched across light years, coordinated with precision that bordered on miraculous. Forge worlds rekindled ancient manufactories, producing weapons, ships, and armor in numbers sufficient to fuel endless expansion. Administrators recorded, categorized, and standardized entire civilizations, transforming chaos into order. The galaxy itself seemed to yield before humanity's advance. Among the legions, camaraderie flourished. Despite differences in doctrine and temperament, the Space Marines viewed themselves as parts of a greater whole. Rivalries existed, but they were tempered by shared purpose. Each victory reinforced a belief that they were building something eternal. There were whispers, even then, of worlds that resisted too fiercely, of victories that felt less complete than others. But such concerns were distant, easily dismissed amid the momentum of triumph. The future appeared vast, open, and assured. In the shadow of the Emperor's grand design, few questioned what might happen if certainty were ever lost. The Imperium had not yet learned the cost of absolute confidence, nor the fragility of unity forged through strength alone. In this age, doubt was a stranger, and hesitation a weakness left behind with the long night of isolation. And so the Great Crusade continued, fleet after fleet pushing deeper into the unknown, carrying with them the unshakable belief that humanity's destiny was not only to survive, but to rule. As the stars passed silently beneath the keels of Imperial warships, and as newly compliant worlds adjusted to life under distant authority, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The dream was still whole, the vision still clear. For now, the Imperium stood unbroken, confident that the future belonged to it alone, and in the quiet between victories, beneath the hum of engines and the slow turning of distant stars, history waited patiently for what would come next. As the Great Crusade pressed onward, its momentum carried not only fleets and armies, but expectations that grew heavier with every conquered system. Victory had become familiar, almost routine, and familiarity bred a quiet burden upon those chosen to lead humanity's advance. Command, in this age, was not merely authority, but responsibility on a scale never before endured. Horus Lupercal bore that weight more visibly than any other. As War Master, he stood between the Emperor's distant will and the practical reality of conquest. His role demanded balance, judgment, and restraint, even as war raged across thousands of fronts. To many, he was the embodiment of the Imperium's promise, strength guided by reason, ambition tempered by unity. Under his command, the Crusade moved with purpose rather than haste. The Primarchs, each leading their legions, answered to Horus in matters of war, though none forgot their direct bond to the Emperor. This delicate structure held through mutual respect rather than coercion. Orders were obeyed not because they were enforced, but because belief still bound the Imperium together. It was an age where trust carried fleets across the void. Across the expanding domains of mankind, newly compliant worlds learned the rhythms of imperial order. Administrators arrived alongside soldiers, bringing standardized laws, tides, and records. Planetary histories were rewritten into a unified narrative of rediscovery rather than conquest. To many citizens, the Imperium felt less like an occupier and more like a long-lost authority returned. Yet unity, though powerful, was never uniform. Some worlds adapted swiftly, eager to trade autonomy for security and access to imperial knowledge. Others complied outwardly while quietly preserving old traditions, awaiting clarity on what this new age truly demanded of them. Such differences were tolerated, so long as loyalty remained intact and the imperial truth went unchallenged. Within the legions themselves, subtle divisions emerged. Each Primarch interpreted the Emperor's vision through a personal lens shaped by origin and experience. Some valued discipline and order above all else, enforcing rigid hierarchies within their ranks. Others emphasized adaptability, initiative, and individual excellence. These variations enriched the Crusade, yet also introduced contrasts that were not always easily reconciled. The Emperor observed these developments from afar. Though absent from the forefront of war, his presence was felt through decree and expectation rather than voice. He entrusted his sons with autonomy, believing that responsibility would refine them. Intervention was rare, measured, and purposeful. In this restraint, he sought to prepare the Imperium for an era beyond endless expansion. The Great Crusade was never intended to last forever. Its purpose was to reunite humanity, secure the galaxy, and lay foundations strong enough to endure peace. Yet peace, paradoxically, proved harder to imagine with each victory. War had become the Imperium's defining motion, its structure shaped around conflict. Even as enemies dwindled, the machinery of conquest continued to turn. Among the ranks of the estates, reflection was uncommon but not absent. Space Marines were engineered for war, yet many retained a quiet awareness of what their existence implied. They were instruments of a singular moment in history, necessary now, but uncertain in a future without battle. Such thoughts were rarely voiced, but they lingered beneath layers of discipline. Horus, more than most, understood this tension. He sought counsel from his brothers, listened to their concerns, and weighed their ambitions against the needs of the whole. His command style favored consensus where possible, decisiveness where required. In doing so, he strengthened loyalty not through fear, but shared purpose. The Crusade thrived under this approach, advancing with confidence rather than urgency. Still, the galaxy remained vast, and certainty could not illuminate every shadow. Beyond imperial borders lay regions unexplored, civilizations unknown, and forces that did not conform to expectation. Reports arrived of compliance campaigns that required greater effort, of victories that came at higher cost. None were alarming in isolation, yet together they hinted that expansion carried limits not yet reached. The Imperium, however, remained assured. Its fleets continued their measured advance, its banners carried across the stars with unwavering resolve. For those living within its growing borders, the future appeared structured, secure, and guided by an unseen hand. Doubt had no language here, only momentum. Throughout this era, time itself seemed abundant. Campaigns were planned in years, not days, and patience was considered a virtue of strength. The Imperium did not rush, for it believed the future was already secured. Distance was measured calmly, losses absorbed methodically, and progress recorded with careful precision. In such measured advance, reflection found space to breathe. Confidence settled deeply, like a steady rhythm beneath every order issued. The cadence of expansion lulled uncertainty into silence, allowing leaders and warriors alike to believe that tomorrow would resemble today, stable, predictable, and enduring, without need for urgency or fear. Such certainty felt natural, almost timeless, as though history itself had agreed to pause and observe humanity's ascent without interruption or challenge from beyond the horizon. And so the Crusade endured, shaped by command and belief, advancing beneath the silent gaze of the Emperor. Each system reclaimed reinforced the sense that humanity stood at the center of destiny, unchallenged and unafraid. Yet in the vast quiet between stars, where messages took months to arrive and decisions echoed across light years, the way to command pressed steadily onward, patient and unseen, awaiting the moment when certainty might finally be tested. Across the widening Imperium, the passage of time took on a different meaning. Campaigns unfolded slowly, measured not by urgency but by inevitability. Fleets departed, vanished into the void, and returned years later bearing news of compliance achieved. To those who served, distance dulled immediacy, replacing emotion with procedure. Orders were issued, received, and executed with calm precision, as though history itself had adopted a steady, unchanging pace. In this rhythm, humanity learned to think on galactic scales, accepting that patience was not hesitation, but strength refined through long endurance over generations of disciplined expansion and confident resolve shared belief. The Emperor's vision rested upon this patience. From Terra, he observed the Crusade progress through reports and silent calculation, intervening rarely. His trust in his sons was deliberate, shaped by the belief that humanity must learn to govern itself beneath a unified ideal. Authority flowed outward rather than downward, encouraging initiative while demanding loyalty. This distance granted the Primarchs freedom to interpret doctrine in practice, while binding them to a shared purpose. In this structure, the Imperium matured, guided by principles rather than constant command, confident in direction yet flexible in execution across countless worlds, systems, and eras beyond Terra. Among the Primarchs, reflections deepened as the Crusade advanced. Each victory reinforced personal philosophies, confirming methods and convictions forged in isolation. Some embraced absolute order, believing stability arose only from rigid control. Others favored adaptability, trusting strength born from understanding diverse circumstances. These differences rarely erupted into conflict, yet they shaped legions in distinct ways. Shared blood bound them together, but divergent paths stretched subtly apart. In this era, Such divergence was considered healthy, evidence of a system strong enough to contain variation without fracture or fear during humanity's confident ascent across the silent stars, enduring unchallenged unity and purpose. Compliance campaigns continued with measured resolve. Worlds reclaimed were studied carefully, their resources catalogued, their populations assessed. Integration followed predictable patterns, minimizing disruption while enforcing imperial law. Where resistance surfaced, it was addressed swiftly, not with anger but certainty. To imperial commanders, opposition was not personal defiance, but a problem requiring correction. This approach reduced chaos and preserved momentum. Over time, entire regions transitioned from isolation to participation, woven into a network that spanned light years, supported by logistics, communication, and shared belief in order across expanding domains, binding humanity's destiny together with calm purpose, trust, and resolve unbroken enduring still. Within the legions of Astartes, discipline remained absolute, yet thought was not absent. Warriors reflected silently upon their purpose between campaigns, contemplating a future shaped by peace rather than war. Such contemplation did not weaken resolve. Instead, it sharpened loyalty to the mission at hand. They understood themselves as instruments of transition, forged to secure an age that might not require them. This awareness fostered a quiet dignity among the ranks. Duty was embraced fully, not for glory, but for the belief that sacrifice now ensured stability later across long centuries, campaigns, and uncounted stars, guarding humanity's shared tomorrow patiently, calmly. The Imperium's confidence radiated outward, shaping diplomacy and war alike. Allies were rare, yet obedience was common, born from the certainty that resistance was futile. This was not arrogance alone, but conviction reinforced by unbroken success. Every compliant world strengthened belief in the Emperor's design, validating decisions made years before. Strategic foresight appeared infallible, and errors seemed minor against overwhelming progress. In such conditions, self-examination faded. Victory became expectation, and expectation hardened into doctrine, leaving little room for doubt to take root or be understood within imperial thought, culture, and collective memory, unchallenged by fate or chance yet unseen still. Communication across the Imperium remained slow by necessity. Messages traveled through the warp, arriving altered by time and distance. Decisions were often made without full knowledge, requiring trust and delegated authority. This separation reinforced autonomy, forcing commanders to act with confidence rather than hesitation. It also introduced silence, long intervals where outcomes remained unknown. Such pauses encouraged reflection, allowing imagination to fill gaps with optimism. In this quiet, belief sustained momentum, carrying fleets forward even when certainty relied upon faith in systems rather than immediate confirmation across vast distances, epochs, and responsibilities shared willingly then, now, always, enduring unspoken trust. Despite growing complexity, the Imperium appeared harmonious. Records suggested efficiency, unity, and alignment of purpose across its domains. Dissent existed, but it was framed as an anomaly, not a warning. The narrative of progress dominated all discourse, leaving little space for alternative futures. Leaders believed themselves custodians of an unbreakable system, refined through conquest and consensus alike. This belief offered comfort and clarity. In embracing it, the Imperium moved forward unburdened by suspicion, convinced that strength alone ensured permanence and that continuity required no vigilance within history's grand design, unfolding steadily, quietly, without pause, reflection, or fear then, now, onward. Thus the Great Crusade persisted, confident and unchallenged, its course set by belief as much as strategy. Humanity advanced beneath banners unmarked by doubt, guided by leaders certain of destiny's favor. The Emperor's dream seemed secure, its foundations laid across countless worlds. In this calm before any reckoning, the Imperium rested within its own certainty. Stars turned, fleets traveled, and history unfolded with measured grace. For those who lived in this age, tomorrow promised only continuation, and the galaxy itself appeared willing to wait, silent and patient, for what humanity would become beyond time, fear, and fragile doubt, dreaming still. As the Great Crusade continued its measured advance, the Imperium began to turn inward as often as it looked toward the stars. Expansion remained relentless, yet consolidation followed closely behind, shaping conquered space into something stable, predictable, and enduring. This phase of the Crusade lacked the drama of first contact, but it carried equal importance for the future that was being assembled. Worlds long reclaimed now felt the full presence of imperial structure, not through armies, but through systems designed to endure. Administrators standardized currencies, calendars, and measurements, replacing local variation with galactic consistency. Compliance was no longer an event, but a condition maintained through constant attention. Across these worlds, populations adapted in quiet ways, adjusting daily life to the rhythms of imperial governance. For many, the Imperium became an abstract presence, distant yet undeniable, felt through regulation rather than force. This subtle authority proved effective, embedding loyalty without spectacle or constant display of power. Within the fleets, command philosophies evolved to reflect this shift from conquest toward preservation. Campaigns were planned not merely to win battles, but to minimize disruption and prepare regions for long-term stability. Military victory became a means rather than an end, subordinate to the Imperium's enduring order. The Space Marine legions adapted accordingly, refining doctrines that emphasized restraint alongside overwhelming capability. Their presence alone often ensured compliance, a reminder of power that rarely needed to be exercised. Such efficiency reinforced a belief that the Imperium had mastered the art of governance through strength. Above all, the Emperor's absence shaped this era as profoundly as his vision. By withdrawing from daily command, he allowed systems to function without reliance on singular authority. This separation fostered confidence, yet also ensured that decisions echoed without immediate correction. Among the Primarchs, this independence sharpened both pride and responsibility. Each grew accustomed to shaping destiny within assigned domains, guided by interpretation rather than instruction. Their successes validated autonomy, reinforcing trust in the structure they upheld. Horus, as War Master, embodied this balance more clearly than any other. He coordinated vast theaters of war while respecting the independence of his brothers. His leadership sustained momentum without eroding trust, a rare equilibrium within such immense scale. Yet beneath this order, complexity increased steadily, stretching the Imperium's ability to observe itself. Distance muted awareness, and information arrived filtered through countless layers of interpretation. Small irregularities passed unnoticed, absorbed into the vast machinery of expansion. Confidence, built upon decades of success, dismissed such gaps as inconsequential. The Imperium trusted its foundations, believing them strong enough to support any future strain. This belief encouraged continuity, not caution, reinforcing forward motion above reflection. In the silence between campaigns, time flowed gently, unmarked by crisis or doubt. Fleets drifted through the void with practiced certainty, carrying humanity's order ever outward. Such motion felt permanent, as though the galaxy itself had accepted imperial rule. History, however, is shaped not only by triumph, but by what triumph conceals. In this era, concealment took the form of assumption rather than deception. The Imperium assumed endurance because it had never known collapse on this scale. Thus, the Crusade entered a phase defined less by discovery and more by maintenance. Systems stabilized, borders expanded steadily, and humanity settled into its perceived destiny. In this calm, ambition rested comfortably beside certainty. The stars offered no challenge, only distance, and distance no longer inspired fear. For those living within the Imperium, tomorrow appeared assured, structured, and unchanging. Such assurance carried comfort, lulling vigilance into quiet rest. As this chapter settles into reflection, the Imperium moves onward without haste. Its foundations appear secure, its leaders confident, its future seemingly written among the stars. In the soft hum of distant engines and the slow turning of compliant worlds, certainty drifts unchallenged. Hey! In this measured calm, the Imperium rests, unaware how fragile such stillness can be, and the galaxy waits in silence for the next turning of history. In the long continuum of the Great Crusade, there came a period when expansion and administration existed in near-perfect balance. The Imperium advanced, yet it also listened to itself, measuring success not only in conquered systems, but in stability maintained. This equilibrium fostered a sense that the Emperor's design was reaching maturity, approaching a state where motion itself would no longer be necessary. Across the Imperium, institutions deepened their roots. The mechanisms of record-keeping, supply, and governance grew more intricate, weaving a web that connected distant worlds through shared obligation. These structures were invisible to most citizens, yet they shaped daily life with quiet authority. Order became habitual, reinforced through repetition rather than force. For the Primax, this era invited contemplation as much as command. Victories no longer demanded constant innovation, allowing leaders to reflect upon their roles within a future Imperium. Each Primarch considered how their legion might exist beyond the Crusade, not as conquerors, but as guardians of settled realm. Such thoughts were not expressed openly, yet they influenced decisions in subtle ways. Horus, as War Master, remained the central axis of coordination. His responsibilities expanded beyond warfare into arbitration, planning, and preservation. He balanced competing priorities with patience, understanding that unity required accommodation as much as authority. Through his guidance, the Crusade retained coherence without sacrificing flexibility. The Emperor's silence persisted, deliberate and profound. His absence from the forefront encouraged self-reliance among his sons, reinforcing the belief that the Imperium was capable of sustaining itself. This distance cultivated confidence, yet it also transformed reverence into interpretation. Without constant guidance, meaning was drawn from memory, precedent, and personal conviction. Within the legions, discipline endured unchanged, but perspective evolved. Campaigns felt less urgent, victories less defining. Space Marines fulfilled their duties with unwavering resolve, yet many sensed that their purpose was becoming transitional rather than eternal. They stood at the edge of a future shaped by their actions, yet not necessarily meant for their continued presence. Among Imperial citizens, life settled into predictable rhythms. Trade routes stabilized, cultures blended cautiously, and planetary identities adjusted to a shared narrative of rediscovery. For most, the Imperium was no longer an idea, but an environment encompassing and constant. Its authority felt as natural as gravity, unquestioned and unseen. Confidence permeated every layer of governance. Problems were addressed methodically, without urgency or alarm. The assumption of continuity guided decision-making, shaping policies designed to endure centuries rather than respond to immediate threat. In this calm, imagination narrowed, focusing on refinement rather than contingency. Yet complexity grew alongside order. Each new system integrated added nuance, stretching administrative reach. Communication delays persisted, creating gaps where interpretation replaced instruction. Such gaps were accepted as manageable, absorbed by trust in leadership and structure. The Imperium believed itself resilient enough to withstand ambiguity. The Great Crusade, once defined by movement, now resembled a living organism settling into equilibrium. Expansion continued, but it no longer defined identity. Preservation became equally significant, shaping doctrine and expectation. This transition was subtle, unfolding over years rather than moments, unnoticed by those immersed within it. History, however, is rarely altered by what is noticed. It shifts through gradual accumulation, through choices made without urgency, through confidence untested by disruption. In this era, the Imperium embodied such gradualism, advancing steadily while assuming permanence. As fleets continued their voyages, the stars offered little resistance. Silence prevailed where danger was once expected. This absence of challenge reinforced belief in destiny's favor, encouraging the notion that the hardest trials had already been overcome. Thus the Imperium moved forward, guided by certainty refined into habit. Leaders governed with assurance, warriors served with discipline, and citizens lived within an order that felt immutable. The dream appeared stable, its foundations unshaken. In the quiet spaces between campaigns and councils, reflection lingered unspoken. Beneath confidence lay an awareness that all structures, no matter how vast, rely upon continued belief. Yet such awareness remained distant, softened by success. As this chapter draws to a close, the Great Crusade persists in measured calm. Humanity stands unified, secure, and assured of its place among the stars. In this stillness, the dream endures, luminous and complete, awaiting the subtle currents of time that will one day test its strength. Beyond the charts and tallies, the Imperium existed as a shared state of mind, sustained by expectation and reinforced by repetition. Children learned imperial history as continuity rather than struggle, while scholars debated refinement instead of survival. Governors planned generations ahead, confident that borders would remain fixed and authority unquestioned. This cultural certainty proved as powerful as fleets, shaping loyalty without coercion. It encouraged patience, rewarded conformity, and dulled curiosity about alternatives. In such an environment, change appeared unnecessary, even disruptive. Stability became virtue, motion suspect. The galaxy seemed finally understood, mapped not only in space but in intention. Humanity believed it had reached an answer rather than a question, and so it rested within that answer, unaware that history never ceases to ask. In the Great Crusade's long shadow, assurance replaced vigilance, and success softened inquiry. Nothing yet demanded reconsideration, and no voice carried urgency. The Imperium slept lightly, believing itself awake, guarded by strength and order. This moment, preserved in calm memory, marked the height of confidence, when humanity stood convinced that destiny had been mastered, and that the future would arrive exactly as planned, unchanged by doubt or disruption alone. As the Great Crusade extended deeper into the mapped and unmapped reaches of the galaxy, a subtle transformation occurred within the Imperium's collective consciousness. Authority, once asserted and tested through conquest, became ambient and unquestioned. It no longer announced itself through banners or war cries, but through expectation. Compliance was assumed before it was confirmed, and obedience became a condition of existence rather than a choice. This transition marked a profound shift in how humanity understood power. The Emperor's vision, articulated through action rather than proclamation, had succeeded beyond initial intent. Worlds no longer debated whether the Imperium would arrive, but how soon. The presence of imperial law shaped planning long before fleets appeared in orbit. Administrators prepared populations in advance, smoothing the path toward integration. Resistance, when it arose, felt increasingly anachronistic, a remnant of an earlier, uncertain age. In this environment, command structures grew ever more confident in their permanence. Orders issued from distant strategiums were executed without hesitation, their origins rarely questioned. Authority flowed smoothly through hierarchies refined by repetition, creating an illusion of inevitability. Decisions echoed outward across light years, shaping lives on worlds whose leaders would never glimpse the faces of those who ruled them. Such distance, once a challenge, now reinforced mystique and legitimacy. Among the Primarchs, this unquestioned authority manifested differently. Each commanded absolute loyalty within their legion, shaping culture, doctrine, and identity according to personal conviction. Their successes reinforced a belief that they were not merely instruments of the Emperor's will, but stewards of a lasting order. This belief strengthened resolve, yet also deepened individuality. Horus continued to navigate this landscape with practiced restraint. As War Master, he embodied unity in an Imperium increasingly defined by specialization. His role demanded constant negotiation, balancing divergent approaches while maintaining coherence. In councils of war, his voice carried weight not through command alone, but through trust earned over decades. This trust sustained cooperation, even as the scale of responsibility grew immense. The Emperor remained distant, his silence interpreted as confidence. Few questioned this absence. It was accepted that his vision had progressed beyond the need for constant oversight. In this interpretation, the Imperium's stability validated his withdrawal. Systems functioned, borders expanded, and humanity prospered. Such evidence appeared irrefutable, reinforcing belief in a design that required no correction. Yet silence carries ambiguity. Without direct guidance, meaning settled into established patterns. Doctrine hardened, assumption solidified, and flexibility narrowed. What had once been principles open to adaptation became axioms immune to challenge. The imperial truth, intended as a guide, evolved into an unexamined foundation. Knowledge advanced, yet curiosity about alternatives diminished. Within the legions, Space Marines sensed this change in subtle ways. Training emphasized adherence over improvisation, continuity over experimentation. Such focus enhanced reliability, but reduced variance. Warriors became symbols as much as soldiers, embodiment of an ideal defined long before. Individual thought persisted, yet it was carefully contained within acceptable bounds. For the citizens of the Imperium, authority felt increasingly impersonal. Governance operated through regulation and routine rather than engagement. Most accepted this willingly, valuing stability above participation. The Imperium provided security, trade, and order, asking little beyond compliance. In return, it demanded trust without intimacy. This arrangement suited an age confident in its trajectory. Across the stars, the machinery of expansion continued its steady operation. New systems were claimed, catalogued, and integrated with minimal disruption. The pace remained deliberate, unhurried by urgency. Each success reinforced a narrative that humanity's ascent was both natural and irreversible. Challenges did arise, but they were framed as anomalies. Unexpected resistance, logistical strain, or administrative failure was attributed to local factors rather than systemic limitation. Solutions address symptoms, preserving faith in the structure as a whole. This approach maintained confidence, yet obscured underlying complexity. History records that this was an era of profound assurance. The Imperium did not merely believe in its strength, it assumed it. Authority was no longer defended, only exercised. In this condition, vigilance softened, replaced by routine. The future was planned as an extension of the present, unaltered by unforeseen disruption. In the vast silence between stars, where no voice questioned command and no force opposed expansion, the Imperium moved as if guided by gravity rather than intention. Momentum replaced deliberation. Power flowed without resistance, shaping destiny through continuation alone. As this chapter draws to a close, the Great Crusade persists beneath the weight of its own success. Humanity stands unified under an authority so complete it no longer announces itself. In the calm that follows unquestioned power, reflection fades into background noise. The stars remain silent, the path clear, and the Imperium advances, unaware that silence itself can be a signal, and that authority unchallenged is authority untested, waiting patiently within the long, quiet night of certainty. By the time the Great Crusade entered its later phases, the Imperium no longer perceived itself as a force in motion, but as a state of being. Expansion continued, fleets still departed and returned, yet these actions felt less like ambition and more like maintenance. Humanity was no longer reaching toward destiny, it was preserving one it believed already achieved. Continuity became the Imperium's defining principle. Institutions designed during the earliest years of reunification now operated with remarkable autonomy. Administrators inherited protocols rather than questioned them, executing responsibilities shaped by precedent instead of debate. Entire sectors were governed through replication of established models, ensuring consistency across distances that defied comprehension. In this repetition, reliability flourished, and innovation receded into careful margins. The Emperor's vision, once articulated through decisive intervention, now existed primarily through memory and interpretation. His ideals were preserved in doctrine, recorded in archives, and reinforced through ritualized procedure. Though stripped of superstition, these practices acquired symbolic weight. They reminded humanity of origins, purpose, and unity, even as direct connection to their source faded. For the Primax, this era tested identity more subtly than war ever had. Each had been forged for conquest, yet conquest now felt secondary. Their legions operated with precision born of habit, executing campaigns that rarely demanded adaptation. Success reinforced confidence, but it also narrowed experience. Command became administrative as often as martial, requiring patience rather than brilliance. In this shift, some Primax found fulfillment, while others felt constrained by the very order they had helped create. Horus remained central, yet his role changed with the Imperium itself. As War Master, he oversaw fewer crises and more coordination. His days were filled with arbitration, allocation, and long-term planning. Where once he had shaped outcomes through decisive action, he now guided systems already in motion. His influence endured, but it was exercised through continuity rather than transformation. This responsibility weighed heavily, though he bore it without visible strain. Across the legions, Space Marines adjusted to this settled rhythm. Training remained rigorous, discipline absolute, but campaigns offered fewer tests of ingenuity. Many warriors found reassurance in predictability, valuing clarity of purpose over challenge. Others sensed an unspoken tension, a feeling that their existence was bound to a moment that was slowly passing. Such thoughts were private, rarely acknowledged, yet they shaped perspective. On compliant worlds, generations grew up knowing nothing but imperial order. For them, the Great Crusade existed as history rather than lived experience. Tales of rediscovery and conquest were recounted as foundational myths, emphasizing unity and inevitability. These narratives reinforced loyalty, presenting the Imperium not as conqueror, but as rightful inheritor of the stars. In this cultural framing, questioning authority seemed unnecessary, even unnatural. The galaxy appeared increasingly quiet. Major threats were rare, resistance localized and brief. The absence of challenge confirmed belief in stability. Strategic planning shifted toward preservation of borders rather than anticipation of conflict. Resources were allocated to refinement, infrastructure, and optimization. The Imperium prepared for longevity, assuming time itself to be an ally. Yet continuity carries its own weight. Systems designed to endure resist alteration, even when conditions change. The Imperium's confidence in its permanence reduced sensitivity to subtle shifts. Small discrepancies accumulated unnoticed, absorbed into bureaucratic tolerance. Communication delays masked inconsistencies, while success discouraged scrutiny. What functioned adequately was rarely examined deeply. The Emperor's silence continued to define this age. It was interpreted as affirmation, proof that his design required no correction. Few considered alternative explanations. The Imperium did not doubt its creator, nor did it expect guidance beyond what had already been given. In this assumption, autonomy matured into independence, and independence into habit. Across the stars, fleets maintained their courses, carrying authority forward through momentum alone. The machinery of the Imperium did not pause, because pausing implied uncertainty. Movement itself became reassurance, a signal that purpose remained intact. Even without urgency, progression continued, steady and unexamined. History later would recognize this period as one of remarkable stability. At the time, it felt simply natural. Humanity occupied its place among the stars with quiet confidence, certain that its systems were sufficient, its leaders capable, and its future secure. Doubt found little space to grow in such an environment, softened by repetition and success. As this chapter settles into stillness, the Imperium endures beneath the weight of its own continuity. Order persists, authority remains unquestioned, and unity holds firm. In the calm that follows constant motion, reflection drifts gently, rarely settling. The stars continue their slow turning, and humanity moves with them, confident that what has been built will remain, unchanged and unchallenged, into whatever tomorrow quietly brings. As the Imperium matured, the Great Crusade entered a phase defined by refinement rather than discovery, where attention turned toward harmonizing vast territories already claimed. Fleets still traveled, but their journeys felt ceremonial, reaffirming authority more than seeking it. Charts were revised, borders clarified, and responsibilities reassigned with patient deliberation. This was governance at galactic scale, measured and impersonal. Confidence permeated every decision, shaped by decades of success. The idea of reversal seemed inconceivable. Humanity believed it had crossed a threshold beyond which decline was impossible, secured by systems, leaders, and shared purpose that appeared immune to erosion by time. Within this stability, authority grew increasingly abstract, residing less in individuals and more in procedure. Administrations functioned through precedent, their actions validated by consistency rather than insight. Worlds differed in culture and environment, yet governance smoothed such variance into standardized expectation. This uniformity reduced friction, encouraging cooperation through predictability. It also dulled awareness of difference. When challenges emerged, they were interpreted through existing frameworks, rarely prompting reconsideration. The Imperium trusted its methods, assuming that processes refined by triumph would remain. Effective indefinitely, capable of resolving any complication through measured adjustment rather than fundamental change across time and space endlessly alone. The Primarchs navigated this environment with varying responses, shaped by temperament and history. Some embraced administration as an extension of command, finding satisfaction in order maintained. Others endured it as obligation, longing for clarity once found in decisive action. Their legions mirrored these attitudes, adapting cultures to reflect leadership priorities. Despite differences, loyalty remained intact, sustained by shared origin and purpose. Disagreement rarely threatened unity, for success continued to validate all approaches. In an age without crisis, diversity of method appeared strength rather than fault, enriching the Imperium's capacity to endure across centuries and countless stars together in silence calmly. At the heart of this order, the Emperor's influence persisted without presence. His intentions were inferred through legacy, encoded within structures that guided action automatically. Reverence shifted subtly, not into worship, but into assumption. His vision was treated as complete, needing preservation rather than interpretation. This belief fostered confidence while narrowing inquiry. When guidance seemed absent, established doctrine filled the space, offering certainty. The Imperium functioned smoothly under this inheritance, mistaking continuity for clarity and stability for finality, unaware that absence can shape outcomes as powerfully as command within history itself over long durations and quiet generations pass unseen thereafter. Throughout Imperial space, culture adapted to permanence. Education emphasized loyalty, patience, and service, presenting the Imperium as natural culmination of human striving. Innovation persisted, yet it was channeled toward optimization rather than transformation. Citizens measured progress by efficiency, not possibility. Such framing nurtured calm acceptance, reducing desire for alternatives. The galaxy felt settled, its mysteries catalogued or dismissed. In this environment, imagination contracted, content to refine what existed. Stability became identity, and identity became expectation, binding societies together through shared belief in an unchanging future stretching across eras without urgent challenge or doubt arising anywhere within imperial domains and now. Military readiness remained absolute, though increasingly ceremonial. Exercises repeated perfected doctrines, reinforcing reliability. Weapons were maintained meticulously, fleets inspected methodically, and responses rehearsed against known scenarios. Unknown threats were devised, yet rarely prioritized. This posture conveyed assurance, projecting strength without provocation. Space Marines embodied this certainty, their presence alone a deterrent. They trained for wars that seemed unlikely, sustaining vigilance through routine. In doing so, readiness became ritual, preserving capability while masking the possibility that future conflict might demand qualities unpracticed within established forms and unfamiliar adaptations beyond comfortable doctrine emerging unexpectedly across distant theaters and times unknown ahead still. The War Master observed these patterns with composed attention. Horus understood continuity's value, yet recognized its weight. His communications emphasized cohesion, reminding leaders that unity required care, not assumption. He encouraged dialogue, moderation, and patience, reinforcing trust among disparate commands. Such guidance maintained balance, though it rarely altered direction. The Crusade advanced as designed, guided by established momentum. Horus served as steward rather than architect, preserving alignment within a system already confident in itself, even as responsibility expanded quietly across the stars over years measured by careful planning alone, without dramatic turning points appearing to challenge expectations then or now ever. Across humanity's domain, time felt generous. Projects spanned generations, investments planned for centuries. This long view nurtured patience, discouraging haste. Leaders believed they were building for eternity, not reacting to crisis. The absence of urgency shaped temperament, fostering deliberation over daring. While such patience strengthened resilience, it also softened alertness. Change was anticipated as gradual, manageable, and internal. The idea of sudden upheaval seemed remote, incompatible with the Imperium's accumulated strength and order, which appeared sufficient to absorb any disturbance without transformation from beyond known boundaries or assumptions held collectively across institutions and cultures everywhere quietly for a time long. As this chapter settles into quiet reflection, the Imperium continues unchanged, sustained by confidence refined into habit. The Great Crusade endures as process rather than passion, its purpose assumed rather than examined. Humanity rests within structures it trusts completely, believing motion itself guarantees success. In the stillness between stars, certainty hums softly, unbroken and reassuring. This is an age defined by what no longer needs proving. Beneath the calm, time moves patiently onward, carrying the Imperium forward, unhurried, convinced that tomorrow will mirror the day and that continuity will forever suffice without requiring reconsideration or vigilance from anyone anywhere ever again. Within the settled expanse of imperial space, the Great Crusade entered a season defined by reassurance rather than urgency. Reports spoke of stability, of borders holding firm, of compliance maintained with minimal effort. Such messages accumulated into a comforting narrative, repeated until it felt self-evident. Leaders read confirmations of success as proof that vigilance could soften without consequence. In this atmosphere, confidence ceased to be a conclusion and became an assumption, quietly shaping decisions expectations, and priorities across fleets, councils, and worlds alike throughout the Imperium at large itself. Administrators and strategists alike began to plan as though uncertainty were an artifact of the past. Models projected continuity, assuming trends would extend smoothly forward. Resources were allocated toward refinement instead of preparation for disruption. This approach rewarded efficiency and discouraged redundancy. Over time, these assumptions embedded themselves within policy, shaping institutions that optimized for permanence. The Imperium did not ignore risk, but it defined risk narrowly, confined to familiar patterns already understood and controlled by precedent. Such framing persisted unquestioned across generations and sectors without significant challenge or review. Among the Primarchs, awareness of this shift varied. Some perceived comfort as validation, believing the Crusade had fulfilled its mandate. Others sensed a subtle narrowing of perspective, though they lacked cause to challenge it. Success had removed the pressure that once demanded creativity. Councils grew procedural, debates brief. Decisions favored consistency over exploration. Yet loyalty remained unbroken, anchored in shared origin and trust, allowing differences in perception to coexist without conflict or urgency. In calm conditions, caution rarely felt necessary, and reflection drifted quietly beyond the tension of leadership circles alone. For the legions Astartes, routine became the primary teacher. Training cycles repeated established doctrine, reinforcing habits perfected long ago. Battlefields rarely demanded deviation, confirming faith in existing methods. Warriors measured excellence by adherence rather than adaptation. This produced reliability of extraordinary degree, yet also reduced exposure to uncertainty. The legions stood ready for wars they understood well, while the possibility of unfamiliar trials remained abstract, theoretical, and easily dismissed within strategic discourse. Confidence filled gaps where experience no longer reached across centuries of service and expansion without meaningful interruption ever. Civilian life within the Imperium mirrored this stability. Commerce flowed predictably, laws changed incrementally, and authority remained distant yet dependable. Citizens learned to trust structures rather than individuals. Governance felt less like rule and more like environment. Because disruption was rare, gratitude replaced vigilance. People planned futures assuming continuity, investing faith in systems that had never failed them. In such conditions, imagination favored refinement of the present rather than contemplation of alternatives beyond imperial order. Security dulled curiosity across generations, while prosperity encouraged acceptance without examination or sustained questioning anywhere. At the strategic level, silence from the emperor continued to shape interpretation. His absence was read as endorsement of existing direction. No signal contradicted accumulated assumption. As years passed, the silence became normalized, woven into planning itself. Authority derived from precedent rather than presence. Leaders acted confidently, believing alignment with legacy ensured correctness. Few considered whether guidance withheld might carry intention beyond approval, or whether patience itself concealed expectation of growth. Such questions felt unnecessary amid uninterrupted success and therefore rarely entered formal discussion within imperial councils and archives alone. Horus observed the Imperium's rhythm with measured awareness. As War Master, he maintained cohesion without disturbing balance. He encouraged patience, reinforcing confidence that unity required calm stewardship. His communications emphasized trust and continuity, rarely urgency. This approach sustained harmony across commands, yet it also preserved existing momentum. Horus acted as guardian of the present trajectory, ensuring stability endured, while deeper questions about future transformation remained gently deferred, postponed by success. Responsibility weighed heavily, though never publicly expressed within records, councils, or private correspondence preserved carefully by composure alone and duty fulfilled. Across the galaxy, the absence of crisis reshaped expectation. Defense planning focused on known threats, extrapolated from past encounters. Unknown possibilities were acknowledged abstractly, yet lacked urgency. This orientation favored preparation for repetition, not surprise. Over time, such planning reinforced belief that future conflict would resemble history. The Imperium trusted its memory more than imagination, valuing lessons already learned above those yet unencountered. Strategic confidence deepened, narrowing anticipatory breadth as institutions rewarded consistency over speculative foresight through policy, doctrine, and cultural reinforcement across fleets, worlds, and generations without dissent voiced. Time itself became an ally in imperial thought. Longevity was assumed, projected endlessly forward. Leaders spoke in centuries, not contingencies. This temporal confidence softened urgency, encouraging belief that adaptation could occur gradually. Sudden change seemed incompatible with accumulated strength. The Imperium expected challenges to announce themselves clearly, allowing orderly response. In this belief, preparation became synonymous with patience, and vigilance transformed into quiet observation rather than active questioning. Such calm shaped leadership tone throughout governance, reducing impulse to alarm or rapid change across eras of continued success and belief held. As this chapter closes, the Imperium stands secure within its own expectations. The Great Crusade continues, not as quest, but as continuation. Humanity moves forward guided by memory and momentum, confident that systems will endure. In the stillness born of success, certainty settles deeply. The stars offer no warning, only distance. Within that quiet, the Imperium advances calmly, unaware that untested assumptions carry weight, and that time, though patient, always asks its due. History waits silently beyond the present moment, recording confidence without judgment or haste until balance inevitably shifts. In the mature years of the Great Crusade, belief itself became an instrument of governance, shaping the Imperium as surely as fleets and armies. What began as shared conviction hardened into structure, embedded within law, doctrine, and expectation. Humanity no longer debated its direction, it inhabited it. The future was approached not as uncertainty, but as continuation, an extension of patterns already proven across the stars. Imperial institutions reflected this confidence in every layer. From sector capitals to distant frontier worlds, procedures mirrored one another with careful fidelity. This repetition created reliability, allowing governance to function across immense distances without constant oversight. Authority expressed itself through consistency rather than presence, reassuring populations that order did not depend upon individual will. Such stability nurtured loyalty quietly, without spectacle or coercion. Education reinforced this architecture of belief. Citizens were taught history as progression rather than struggle, emphasizing reunion, unity, and inevitable ascent. The Great Crusade appeared in records as fulfillment of destiny, not response to crisis. Through this framing, obedience felt reasonable, even natural. The Imperium was not portrayed as one possible future, but as a culmination of all prior striving. Within the legions of Astartes, belief took disciplined form. Space Marines understood themselves as guardians of an achieved order, protectors rather than pioneers. Their training emphasized preservation of doctrine perfected through long experience. Innovation existed, but it was bounded, constrained by reverence for established success. This focus produced forces of unmatched reliability, though it also narrowed the space for unconventional thought. The Primarchs embodied belief in different ways. Each interpreted the Imperium's purpose through personal conviction, shaping legions accordingly. Their authority remained unquestioned, reinforced by lineage and achievement. Councils among them grew increasingly formal, guided by precedent. Disagreement rarely escalated, resolved instead through reference to shared history. Unity persisted, sustained by confidence rather than deliberation. Horus continued to serve as axis of coordination. His leadership emphasized harmony, balancing divergent interpretations without challenging foundations. He understood that belief, once established, required protection as much as power. His communications reinforced continuity, reminding commanders that stability itself was victory. In doing so, he preserved alignment, though deeper transformation remained beyond immediate consideration. The Emperor's continued absence defined this period profoundly. His silence was interpreted as trust, even completion. Few imagined guidance still forthcoming. His vision was treated as finalized, preserved within systems designed to perpetuate it indefinitely. In this belief, autonomy matured into self-sustaining order. The Imperium governed itself through inheritance rather than instruction. Success reinforced belief, yet in its repetition lay the danger of complacency, a reliance on proven patterns over scrutiny of the unknown. Each adjustment made to compensate for anomalies only seemed to confirm that the Imperium's design was infallible. Even within this calm, small measures of foresight persisted. Leaders scheduled inspections, reviewed reports, and anticipated contingencies with care. Yet the scale of the Imperium ensured that gaps would always exist, however minor. No system, no matter how meticulously maintained, could account for every eventuality across countless star systems, billions of inhabitants, and fleets stretching across light years. The recognition of this truth was subtle, almost imperceptible, acknowledged quietly by only a few, yet present in every measured decision. And so the Imperium continued, confident yet quietly shadowed. The Great Crusade advanced as it always had, fleets moving, legions vigilant, administrators meticulous, citizens obedient. Yet beneath this apparent perfection, the first faint reminders emerge that even order has boundaries, and that certainty, no matter how enduring, carries a quiet weight of unseen possibilities. As this chapter concludes, the Imperium rests in calm, unaware of the full scope of what lies beyond calculation. Fleets continue their voyages, records are updated, and government proceeds with steady hand. The stars remain silent witnesses, and humanity moves forward, confident, disciplined, and unquestioning. Yet in the quiet spaces between worlds, the weight of assumption presses gently, reminding all that the galaxy is vast, and that even the most assured systems exist within horizons beyond immediate understanding. The Great Crusade endures, serene in motion, yet subtly aware that certainty is never absolute, and that calm is always measured against the unknown. By this point in the Great Crusade, the Imperium had reached a scale of operation unmatched in human history. Star systems numbered in the thousands, fleets traversed vast distances with precise timing, and the legions of stars had matured into instruments of near-perfect reliability. Authority was exercised not as assertion, but as expectation. The people, the administrators, and even entire worlds moved according to patterns established decades before. The Imperium had become a living structure, its weight both reassuring and absolute. In this environment, continuity itself became the standard of measure, and the future seemed secured simply because it had always been guided along the same trajectory. Governance at this scale demanded more than enforcement. It required perception, the ability to anticipate deviations before they became disruptions. Administrators and officers alike relied upon systems of redundancy, recording every variable, cataloging every report, and comparing it against precedent. Efficiency became synonymous with reliability. Every deviation, no matter how minor, was absorbed into procedure and reclassified as an anomaly already accounted for. The Imperium functioned on faith in its own design, and each success reinforced that faith, strengthening the perception of infallibility across generations and vast distances alike. The Primarchs, now seasoned beyond measure, understood that their authority derived not only from skill in warfare but from the strength of these systems. Each led their legion with attention to detail, ensuring compliance without resorting to overt control. Discipline was maintained through trust, expectation, and example. The Space Marines internalized procedures so completely that they became extensions of institutional certainty. Their victories were not simply tactical. They validated the framework that sustained the Crusade itself. Within this structure, leadership felt natural, almost effortless, for those trained to operate within its bounds. Horus, as War Master, continued to embody this principle. He coordinated disparate campaigns across light years with patience, guiding strategy while preserving autonomy among his brothers. His decisions emphasized coherence over intervention, reinforcing unity without heavy-handed enforcement. He measured not only outcomes but also the degree of confidence within his commands, aware that morale, belief, and subtle trust were as vital to long-term success as any fleet or legion. In doing so, he maintained balance, ensuring that the machinery of the Crusade functioned smoothly, even when unforeseen factors appeared at its edges. Even with fleets and systems operating at near-perfect efficiency, the Imperium relied upon redundancy to mitigate uncertainty. Worlds were governed with overlapping administrative hierarchies. Communication channels were monitored across multiple vectors. Fleets conducted regular drills to confirm readiness. Such measures reinforced confidence and created a culture of predictability. Deviations were catalogued and studied, not feared. Order was itself a safeguard, and the mere act of adherence became both shield and measure of success. The galaxy, though vast and full of unknowns, began to feel as though it had been tamed by structure and protocol. Yet the Imperium's greatest strength also introduced subtle vulnerability. Confidence, perfected through decades of routine, encouraged assumptions. Leaders expected outcomes to mirror precedent. Administrators trusted the machinery of governance to compensate for anomalies. Even the Primarchs occasionally measured risk by repetition rather than intuition. Each action reinforced continuity, but each assumption also carried weight. The galaxy's enormity meant that gaps, however small, could never be entirely eliminated. Even certainty rested upon fragile underpinnings, though none within the Imperium paused long enough to question this truth. The Emperor's absence continued to define this era. His silence was interpreted as affirmation of existing systems, and the Imperium operated on inherited vision rather than direct guidance. His ideals persisted as doctrine, shaping policy, procedure, and expectation. By removing himself from active command, he had created space for autonomy to flourish, but autonomy, unchecked by continual perspective, risked ossifying into assumption. Still, his trust fostered confidence across generations, reinforcing belief in both authority and destiny, even in worlds far removed from terror. Within the legions, this assurance manifested in absolute discipline and composure. Space Marines performed their duties with unerring precision, conducting operations according to principle rather than improvisation. Even in unfamiliar systems or under unexpected conditions, they relied upon learned patterns, ensuring outcomes aligned with expectation. Innovation existed only where it reinforced continuity. In effect, the Imperium became self-protecting. Its structure, culture, and people all contributed to preserving order without requiring intervention. Civilian populations mirrored this stability. Societies adjusted to imperial presence as naturally as they breathed. Daily routines adhered to expectation. Commerce, governance, and civic life all reinforced continuity. Citizens rarely contemplated the possibility of disruption, and when anomalies occurred, they were interpreted as temporary and isolated. Stability itself became culture, as unquestioned as law or gravity. For those living within the Imperium, the galaxy felt complete and immutable. As fleets moved between systems, as records were compiled and analyzed, and as legions maintained order across countless worlds, the Imperium advanced with calm precision. Success reinforced itself, creating a feedback loop of confidence, obedience, and predictability. Even the smallest deviations were absorbed, catalogued, and corrected through established protocol. In this environment, the Great Crusade seemed less like conquest and more like the ongoing unfolding of a preordained design. As this chapter draws to a close, the Imperium rests beneath the weight of its own stability. Authority flows silently, expectation governs automatically, and belief sustains momentum. Humanity exists within a framework so complete it feels eternal. The stars themselves seem aligned with this quiet order. And yet, beneath the surface of this meticulously maintained certainty, subtle pressures persist, hinting that even the most enduring structures may someday be tested. For now, the Imperium sleeps lightly, confident, unchallenged, and unshaken, moving forward across the galaxy in calm, deliberate motion, certain that time itself will honor the architecture of its achievement. By this stage in the Great Crusade, the Imperium had achieved a level of uniformity and certainty unmatched in human history. Systems operated predictably. Fleets moved in synchronization across light years, and the legions of Astartes executed their duties with an efficiency honed over decades. Authority was no longer a matter of force. It had become expectation. Obedience was habitual, a natural response reinforced through ritual, precedent, and observation. The galaxy itself seemed to bend toward continuity, as if the weight of human will impose order upon the stars themselves. Yet beneath the surface of assured motion, subtle currents of variance persisted. Minor deviations in supply, discrepancies in planetary reporting, and the occasional divergence of local governance hinted at the limits of control. These anomalies were minor, addressed before they could propagate, yet their presence reminded those attuned that the Imperium, vast and meticulous as it had become, could not account for every detail. Awareness of this fact was rare and mostly unspoken, yet it lingered in the background, shaping cautious thought among those responsible for overseeing the crusade. Horus, as War Master, was acutely aware of these subtleties. His role was no longer simply martial. It had become a discipline of perception. He monitored patterns, assessed the performance of command structures, and ensured that the assumptions of continuity were reinforced rather than questioned. In doing so, he preserved unity, not through edict alone, but through the careful maintenance of confidence. Even subtle disquiet among his brothers or subordinate commanders could undermine cohesion, and he knew that the strength of the Imperium depended as much on belief as it did on fleets and legions. The Primarchs continued to guide their legions with precise attention. Each had become a master of both combat and administration, capable of anticipating outcomes across campaigns that spanned decades and hundreds of star systems. Within their command, Space Marines remained disciplined, executing operations according to doctrine while internalizing principles of the Emperor's vision. Their understanding of purpose had matured. They were no longer simply agents of conquest, but stewards of stability. Yet even among these superhuman figures, there was a subtle recognition that the universe held unknown variables beyond immediate comprehension. Across the civilian worlds, the Imperium's authority was experienced as inevitability. Law, commerce, and culture were shaped by expectation and reinforcement. Citizens rarely questioned governance, for it had always existed as an unseen but constant framework. Routine became both shield and anchor, smoothing the imperfections of local administration. Worlds integrated seamlessly into the broader Imperium, and minor deviations were reframed as idiosyncrasies, absorbed without disrupting the larger pattern. In this environment, the population moved confidently through daily life, unaware of the delicate mechanisms that maintained their security. Communication remained a constant, measured flow, connecting the distant reaches of human space. Orders, reports, and assessments traversed vast distances through both physical and warp channels, yet each transmission reinforced a sense of continuity rather than introducing uncertainty. The slow pace of information imposed reflection and deliberation, reducing rash decisions. Mistakes could be corrected before they became crises, yet the very reliance upon procedure carried subtle risk. It encouraged assumption that the system could absorb any deviation without failure. Within the legions of Astartes, this trust in procedure reinforced culture. Training cycles and campaign planning emphasized precision and repetition. Warriors became extensions of doctrine, capable of responding to predictable threats with absolute reliability. Innovation existed within control parameters, always aligned with precedent. This approach ensured success but also produced a galaxy in which unforeseen events could have disproportionate impact if they escaped the framework of expectation. Yet such events were rare, and confidence remained unshaken. The Emperor's continued silence contributed to the stability of the era, yet its effect was paradoxical. His absence provided autonomy, allowing the Primarchs to exercise judgment across vast distances. It also encouraged interpretation of his vision as complete, a self-sustaining design requiring preservation rather than adjustment. Doctrine hardened as a result, and while success reinforced its rigidity, subtle gaps in awareness quietly expanded. Though no one questioned the Imperium's trajectory openly, there was an unspoken understanding that absolute certainty was an illusion, a boundary never fully crossed by even the most capable leaders. Despite this near-perfect order, the universe beyond human control remained expansive and indifferent. Stars burned, systems evolved, and unknown phenomena persisted in ways the Imperium could not predict. Though these factors were largely abstract, their existence shaped the calculus of leaders attuned to long-term stability. Fleets, legions, and administrators operated on assumptions of continuity, yet every calculation carried the silent acknowledgement of unknown variables, the ever-present possibility that even small divergences could ripple outward across interconnected systems. In this context, the Great Crusade advanced with both grace and deliberation. Fleets traveled across the void, worlds were catalogued and administered, and the legions executed their duties without interruption. Systems once isolated were integrated, and borders extended steadily. Success reinforced itself, generating confidence across both command and citizenry. Continuity, once established, became a self-perpetuating force, shaping thought, behavior, and expectation across the Imperium. As this chapter draws to a close, the Imperium rests within a calm that is both deliberate and fragile. Authority flows quietly, belief sustains momentum, and the Great Crusade moves forward as if the galaxy itself conspired to maintain order. Yet beneath this surface, currents whisper reminders that even perfection is bounded, that even continuity has edges. In the stillness between stars, the Imperium continues with measured precision, secure in its own processes, confident in its achievement, and unaware that the faintest variations, unobserved and unchallenged, may already be tracing paths that no procedure can fully contain. The galaxy sleeps under human order, serene and obedient, yet alive with possibility, waiting silently for what time will reveal. By now, the Imperium had grown into a vast organism, spanning thousands of star systems, countless worlds, and innumerable populations. Its presence was both tangible and abstract, tangible in fleets that traversed light years with precision, in fortresses rising from barren worlds, in the legions of stars standing vigilant across strategic positions, abstract in the sense that its authority had become a condition of existence, a natural law to which every governor, soldier, and citizen adhered without question. Humanity, united under the Emperor's distant vision, perceived the galaxy as ordered, predictable, and unchanging. The weight of certainty itself became the Imperium's most enduring instrument, flowing quietly through every channel of administration and governance, binding countless disparate systems into a single structure compliance. Within this immense framework, redundancy was not simply a precaution, it was a very architecture of stability. Administrators duplicated systems of record, mapped trade routes through multiple redundancies, and monitored logistical chains across hundreds of worlds. Commanders rehearsed contingencies at scales that spanned entire sectors. Each layer of oversight reinforced the one above and below it, creating a lattice that could absorb minor disruption without visible consequence. To live within this order was to accept the inevitability of coordination, even without witnessing every link. One assumed that every link existed, that every cog turn is expected, and that the sum of these innumerable parts formed a coherent whole capable of carrying humanity forward for generations. The Primarchs continued to exemplify this balance between autonomy and fidelity. Each had been forged for war, yet now many found that the true test of leadership lay not in decisive battle, but in careful management of expectation. Their legions functioned as extensions of both their will and the Imperium systems, enforcing authority while observing, recording, and correcting anomalies. The Space Marines executed operations flawlessly, yet their actions increasingly reflected continuity rather than improvisation. Innovation was measured against precedent. Deviation existed only to reinforce cohesion. The legions had become custodians of order as much as agents of conquest, guardians of human destiny as defined by patterns already established. Horus, serving as War Master, bore the immense responsibility of coordinating these currents across the galaxy. His leadership emphasized not only strategy but trust that procedures would function, that his brothers would act in alignment, that fleets and administrators would fulfill their roles as designed. Where once decisive action had been paramount, now discretion, observation, and subtle intervention defined his command. He guided through reinforcement rather than imposition, ensuring that confidence remained unshaken, that momentum persisted, and that the crusade itself flowed like a river constrained by invisible banks of expectation. Even the Emperor's absence continued to shape the Imperium profoundly. Without his direct presence, his rule was inferred through precedent, codified doctrine, and the successes of the legions. Leaders interpreted the Emperor's vision as complete, a design to be preserved rather than questioned. Autonomy matured into assumption. Obedience became ritualized, reinforced not by fear but by trust in patterns that had always delivered stability. The galaxy moved in synchrony, as though acknowledging a plan whose origin it neither witnessed nor could contest. Silence had become the most subtle expression of authority, its influence absolute. Across the civilian world, culture mirrored this pervasive order. Daily life followed predictable rhythms. Work, governance, and ritual-structured societies into smooth patterns that reflected the Imperium's priorities. Children learned history as a series of milestones, reinforcing obedience through narrative. Art, education, and discourse emphasized unity, continuity, and the inevitability of human expansion. The Imperium was not only a government but an environment, shaping thought and expectation without the need for overt compulsion. Compliance, in this context, was instinctual, almost invisible. Yet beneath this surface of smooth operation, the imperceptible weight of accumulated assumption persisted. Minor irregularities, small errors, or unforeseen interactions were quietly absorbed into the system, corrected before they could ripple outward. This approach reinforced confidence but also created blind spots. The Imperium measured stability by observable consequence, not by latent tension. Each correction, though minor, reinforced belief in infallibility. Yet the very perfection of these mechanisms masked the reality that unknown variables continue to exist beyond observation, beyond expectation, beyond the reach of any doctrine. Time in this era felt both expansive and patient. Projects extended across centuries, strategies considered generations into the future. The crusade was measured not in battles, but in the slow accumulation of order. Fleets patrolled regions long pacified. Administrators revised records with meticulous care. Legions refined training cycles and ceremonial duties with near-religious exactitude. The galaxy, while silent and obedient, remained alive with potential deviation. Yet the Imperium, confident in its own systems, neither feared nor anticipated disruption on a scale that might challenge its foundational certainty. The structure of authority itself became almost organic. Communication, logistics, governance, and military might intertwine to form a living network. The Imperium moved like a single organism, with fleets as limbs, legions as muscle, and administration as nervous system. Citizens were both cells and observers, acting according to expectation, unaware of the complexity that sustained them. Within this vast mechanism, the machinery of command functioned automatically, yet was maintained with conscious care by those at every level who recognized that their actions preserved more than immediate order. They preserved continuity, belief, and the perception of inevitability itself. As this chapter concludes, the Imperium exists in calm authority, confident, methodical, and unchallenged. Fleets continue their journeys, worlds operate according to expectation, and the legions maintain vigilance without strain. Order has become both substance and culture, authority both unseen and absolute. Yet beneath this smooth operation, subtle currents of variance flow quietly, hinting at the limits of even the most perfected systems. In the stillness between stars, humanity moves forward, assured in the continuity it has built, yet unknowingly dancing along the edges of factors it cannot fully measure. The Great Crusade persists, serene and deliberate, secure in motion, yet quietly poised on the threshold of unknown futures that time alone will eventually reveal. As the Great Crusade continued into its later years, the Imperium had become a galaxy-spanning organism of unprecedented scale and complexity. Its fleets traversed interstellar distances with near-absolute precision, its legions of Astartes carried out campaigns with unwavering discipline, and its administrative machinery maintained order across countless worlds simultaneously. Authority no longer required assertion. It had become expectation, ingrained into culture, governance, and thought. To exist within the Imperium was to exist within certainty. Obedience, loyalty, and trust had become instinctive, supported by decades of repetition, success, and reinforcement. Humanity's expansion was no longer a matter of ambition. It was a natural state of being, maintained as a rhythm that echoed across star systems. Even in this apparent perfection, subtle deviations persisted. Minor logistical misalignments, rare delays in communication, and the occasional divergence in planetary compliance served as reminders that no system, however vast or precise, could fully encompass the unpredictable. These anomalies were minor, contained, and quickly resolved, yet their repetition created faint threads of tension that only the most observing could perceive. Within the legions, commanders noticed them not as threats but as faint signs of the universe's refusal to conform completely to human expectation. The Imperium's triumph had created both confidence and fragility. Stability had become so absolute that even small disturbances began to hint at limits beyond the known. Horus, as War Master, managed the crusade with careful attention to both action and perception. He understood that the maintenance of belief and unity was as essential as tactical success. Fleets and legions functioned largely through established doctrine, yet their effectiveness depended on the preservation of trust in command, in precedent, and in the Emperor's distant vision. Horus's guidance was subtle, reinforcing confidence, moderating uncertainty, and balancing initiative with expectation. Through him, the mechanisms of authority continued to operate smoothly, even as the vastness of the Imperium introduced variables beyond immediate observation. The Primarchs maintained their roles with varying degrees of engagement. Some immersed themselves in administration, ensuring that every sector and every campaign functioned according to plan. Others observed quietly, attuned to the smallest signs of variance. The legions of Astartes reflected their leaders' temperaments, embodying both reliability and vigilance. Space Marines executed operations flawlessly, their actions measured, precise, and always within the boundaries of precedent. Innovation, when it occurred, was subtle and always aligned with doctrine, reinforcing continuity rather than disruption. In this way, The legions became custodians of the Emperor's vision, guardians not merely of conquered territory but of order itself. Across civilian populations, the Imperium's influence had become absolute in both perception and practice. Governance, commerce, and cultural life followed predictable patterns. Education reinforced loyalty and stability, presenting the crusade as both inevitable and just. Citizens rarely questioned the structures that shaped their lives, for those structures had delivered security, prosperity, and continuity for generations. Even anomalies, local disputes, natural disasters, or unexpected challenges were reframed as minor exceptions, absorbed into the broader narrative without disturbing faith and authority. Order itself became habit, and habit became identity. Time in this era was measured not in crises or battles, but in consolidation and refinement. Star systems were catalogued, fleets maintained, and records updated with meticulous care. Strategic planning extended across centuries, assuming that existing structures and principles would endure indefinitely. Patience was both virtue and strategy. Urgency was largely unnecessary. By relying on the inertia of proven systems, the Imperium projected an appearance of permanence that seemed unassailable. Even minor anomalies were absorbed into the machinery of governance, reinforcing confidence while quietly masking the existence of unforeseen variables. The Emperor's absence continued to define the rhythm of the crusade. His silence, interpreted as trust and affirmation, allowed autonomy to flourish among the Primarchs and their legions. Doctrine hardened into principle, expectation became obedience, and belief became both method and measurement. Autonomy, unchecked by immediate guidance, grew into assumption. Systems functioned not merely because they were designed to, but because those within them believed in their necessity and correctness. The Imperium had become a self-sustaining organism, thriving on alignment, expectation, and faith. Yet even in this calm, subtle pressures lingered beneath the surface. Minor anomalies, patterns of divergence, and the sheer scale of the Imperium introduced risk that could not be fully predicted. The galaxy beyond human reach remained vast and indifferent, and even the most disciplined fleets and legions could not anticipate every eventuality. These factors were small, abstract, and easily dismissed, yet their accumulation suggested that even perfection had boundaries. Unseen variables existed quietly, pressing against the edges of authority, expectation, and procedure. As fleets moved, as planets adhered to governance, and as the legions maintained vigilance, the Imperium seemed timeless, secure in its own systems. Success reinforced itself, and continuity felt absolute. Yet beneath the serene motion, subtle currents hinted at limits, whispering that even order has its edges. Authority, confidence, and belief were sustained, but they were tested by scale, distance, and the unknown. The galaxy remained vast and silent, and the Imperium continued, confident, deliberate, and disciplined, unaware that the first whispers of change had begun to ripple along the edges of certainty. As this chapter closes, the Imperium rests in poised tranquility. The Great Crusade proceeds across the stars with careful precision, its fleets coordinated, its legions vigilant, its systems functioning as if untouched by uncertainty. Humanity exists within order so complete it feels eternal. Yet, beneath the surface, subtle currents stir, small and almost imperceptible, reminding that even the most perfect systems carry the potential for transformation. The galaxy remains silent, the stars watch patiently, and the Imperium moves forward in calm, confident motion, unaware that the edges of certainty are approaching the first stirrings of change.